W.E.B. Du Bois's theory of double consciousness. In his text, The Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois explained the plight of African Americans. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of his older selves to be lost. He would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world and Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. For the original formulation of the theory, Du Bois developed the theory to explain the plight of marginalized African Americans, whom he described as dithering individuals constantly trying to merge the two-ness of themselves through African American culture and the wider spectrum of American culture, a culture that is undeniably tethered to the dark history of slavery. It is the idea of blacks trying to manage the concept of the dual self in order to be accepted in both cultures. According to the theory, African Americans and other marginalized groups have to view themselves not only through black culture, but also through a lens that has been established by mainstream white culture, which maintains racist roots that have been tied to the concept of slavery. When one even considers popular culture, one can understand from the tenets of this theory why so many blacks relegate themselves to occupations in sports and entertainment, which reflects a slave mentality. Similar to slavery, where slaves worked to maintain the plantation, build economy, and serve as entertainment, many blacks at high athletic ability ultimately play professional sports, serve as a form of entertainment, and essentially serve the capitalist machine, which is primarily run by white males. Ultimately, African American males see themselves through mainstream society's lens, which causes them to resort to sports and entertainment. As explained by double consciousness, many black males, along with society, do not immediately associate themselves with being academic scholars. Thus, African American males select and are offered less challenging coursework as a result of society's expectations for them. Du Bois described blacks as not having a true identity of self as a result of this constant reflection of oneself through mainstream cultural values. With Du Bois's assertion that blacks lack a notion of the true self, one can understand, again, why so many black males live down to the negative representations of themselves featured in every type of media that highlight the black problem. The theorist. W.E.B. Du Bois was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts in 1868 following the legal emancipation of enslaved blacks. Although African American, he grew up in an area where his race did not seem to impact his early social life with other youth. As he continued to grow up, he realized his difference and the impact of his race on others' perceptions of him. Because of his academic talents, he went on to earn a bachelor's degree from Fisk University, where he learned a great deal about race and the two worlds of the South. He later earned a second bachelor's from Harvard, where he realized he did not completely fit in, and more so felt the double consciousness that he described. He ultimately went on to earn his PhD from Harvard. Du Bois wrote the first assessment of a black community in the U.S. upon completing a research project through the University of Pennsylvania, and the research was later published as the Philadelphia Negro. Upon recognizing the hardships of African Americans, including himself, one of whom was educated and having the tools to improve those circumstances through the education he had been afforded, much of his writing addressed this problem. Further refinements of the theory. Further refinements include works by Paul Gilroy and Frantz Fanon, both of whom expanded the discussion to include the international plight of blacks. Paul Gilroy, a British academic, included the transatlantic trade route and the exclusion of British blacks within the discussion of double consciousness. He described how blackness in British culture was perceived as an entity that could potentially infringe upon the sanctity of Britishness and was thus overlooked to never be discussed or addressed. It simply became a problem that society disregarded. Frantz Fanon was a native of Martinique, which was under French rule. He psychoanalyzed the marginalized black individual in his important work, Black Skin, White Mask. In the work, he discussed the impact of colonization and how blacks were never free from its wrath. Their fates were forever tied to it, and their willingness to comply contributed to this double consciousness. Their yielding to the oppressors while they also felt the tug of their heritage and roots. Several theorists also introduced the discussion of gender along with double consciousness. The theory constructs included the two selves of the oppressed individuals, the perceptions of the oppressed by the dominant culture, the struggle and longing of the marginalized to be accepted within both worlds, the loss of culture on the part of the oppressed people, and the cultural influence of the dominant culture. With regard to the application of theory in literature, the theory of double consciousness has been applied to various studies within education and within literature. The two featured studies here both present qualitative approaches while applying the theory of double consciousness, and they address issues faced by different groups, including African American males and community college professors of diverse ethnic backgrounds. An article also addressed some of the transformations of double consciousness to include learned helplessness, as many blacks have learned to play the role of the victim. In their study, Banks and Hughes chronicle the experiences and challenges of African American male undergraduates who have been identified as having some type of learning disability. The purpose of the study was to highlight the African American male with disabilities experience within the college setting because traditionally this voice had been ignored. This study featured an examination of this topic through critical race theory with an emphasis on double consciousness. In this study, 12 African American male participants with disabilities underwent a phenomenological interview process after successfully completing one semester of college coursework. Upon data collection and analysis, this study found that disability labels led to diminished expectations, which caused students to develop alternative narratives in order to overcome lowered expectations and self-perceptions. This study also found that African American male students with disabilities found a more welcoming and nourishing academic home within a historically black college setting. Similarly, Levin and his team applied critical race theory with an emphasis on double consciousness to their study of community college faculty of color. The purpose of this study was to examine the identity conflicts that ethnically diverse faculty members face within the community college setting. Data was collected from the various narratives and stories that were shared by faculty members of color, and one dominant theme that researchers found was that ethnically diverse faculty found the need to suppress their personal identity in order to maintain their acceptance within the university environment. One present-day transformation regarding double consciousness that has taken place among blacks has been to assume the role of the victim, one who is helpless. And this in addition goes along with the slave mentality. This topic was featured in the article Double Consciousness in Black America by McWhorter. In the article, the author highlighted the trend of African Americans who perceive themselves through the lens of mainstream culture as one who is incapable of, for example, acquiring employment or earning an education due again to a mentality that stems from slavery, where individuals claim that they are bound by the shackles that society has placed upon them. With regard to the application of theory to a chosen contemporary issue, black males are overrepresented in special education courses. They lag behind their peers in academic achievement, and they are disciplined and suspended from schools at higher rates than their peers by staggering numbers. Double consciousness could explain this phenomenon. The theory could help explain why so many youth would rather live down to society's expectations of them by allowing themselves to be subject to these statistics by meeting the requirements of special education services and simply serving as entertainment for their peers instead of as academics who are intelligent and capable of learning curriculum. The proposed study could apply a mixed methods approach that carefully considers the theory of double consciousness in order to analyze and understand the current percentages and performance of African American males who are enrolled in a racially diverse middle school in the southeastern United States. Data could be collected through interviews, observations, and test and survey data. The qualitative data will be coded and analyzed for trends and themes, and the quantitative data will be collected and analyzed in order to identify the correlation between students' expressions of double consciousness and their participation in special education, their academic performance, and their behavior.